Welcome from my side. I'm Antonia Cornaro. I'm an expert on underground space from Amberg Engineering. And we're part of the Amberg Group. We collaborate intensively with the Hagerbach Test Gallery. I also lecture on the planning of underground space at the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. And I'm the chair of the ITA Committee of Underground Space, ITECUS. So I professionally, I'm very involved with the underground space. What is the underground space as an asset for our cities, but for urban regions? And of course, we have more and more applications nowadays to use the subsurface for. And we are talking more and more about the energy components of the subsurface. The subsurface as a resource, but also the subsurface for storage purposes. And we have assembled today a very reputable panel here. I have 3 panelists here. We will talk about, we give an overview of H2, recent studies, tests, implementations. We have Pascal Briand from Geostock. We have Saurabh Tembun from Soitec. And we have Stefan Oberholzer from the Federal Office of Environment in Switzerland. So we have one very prominent speaker on industry in France, Pascal, who will say what is happening in France, but also worldwide in this field. We have Saurabh from Soitec, which is a startup, a spin-off of EPFL, and who have actually won the Mars Habitat Challenge in 2022 here in Hagerbach, I believe it was. And you are also a member of the Subspace Energy Hub with your startup that's really taking off, and you will tell us about that and your special technology. How do you produce hydrogen, and how do you convey it? And we have Stefan Oberholzer, who will talk on the federal policy level, what is happening in Switzerland. And if we all know, we are all interested in this topic, hydrogen is such a big topic now because it's a form of a renewable energy that we can produce very cost efficiently in theory. And there, it's an energy source that can be stored, which is, as Aurora said in the introduction, such a big asset. We can store the energy and bring it forward when we need it in peak times. And of course here we are in an underground space. Why? Because we are interested in finding out more, in discussing the opportunities and the potentials of storing hydrogen in underground rock caverns. And we will hear a lot about that also in panel 2 and panel 3 this morning. But enough of an intro. I give the word to Pascal Briand, who will talk about, give you the pointer here, the clicker. You will tell us all about what's happening in France, correct? And worldwide, I suppose. So Pascal, the floor is yours. This is it, yeah. Okay,
so good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be the first one to talk this morning, even if it might not be the most optimistic discussion and presentation from me, but you will see. So just first, a brief introduction of what Geostock is. Geostock is an engineering company working on underground storage for more than close to 60 years now. It's part of Vinci Construction Group, which is one of the major construction company in France. So we have been working all around the world in different countries for different storage, as you can see. I will skip a bit fast on this. What is interesting is that we are working on the various steps of the project. So from engineering, design, pre-feasibility, feasibility, basic design, then the follow-up of the construction by contractors. We are not contractors ourselves. And then operation and maintenance of the facilities. We are operating several facilities around the world in Singapore, Mexico, in France, for example. What is interesting here is that we are working on the various underground storage techniques. So the first one is on salt caverns, which was the first underground storage capacity developed by Geostock 60 years ago in France. So it's leach salt caverns. We are working also on depleted fields and aquifers in various parts of the world also. We are working on unlined mine rock caverns for storage of hydrocarbons, LPG or crude oils. And we are now working also on mine rock caverns, lined rock caverns. This one is under development. We have not yet constructed this. We are developing, as we will be talking later. By product, you can see here that most of the products that we are storing are liquid hydrocarbons, LPG, and natural gas, most of them in salt caverns. Regarding H2, because the topic here is storing H2 underground, so the latest studies that we have been conducted, you can see here on the map that it's in various countries. What is interesting to note is, so this one is the different types of feasibility or pre-feasibility or a bit more advanced project that we have been working on. What is interesting to see is here. We have 5 projects in porous reservoirs, in depleted fields or porous reservoirs. We have 17 projects in salt caverns and 5 projects. When I say projects, it's more pre-feasibility studies or feasibility studies in mine-lined rock caverns, meaning that these mine-lined rock caverns is less than 20% of the project or the studies that we have been conducted for H2 storage. So right now, most of the projects are focusing on salt caverns, but now under development is this mine-lined rock cavern. The question is, how mature is the H2 market for this storage? Just to briefly remind you about the various shades of the H2, which is interesting. It's not by proportion, it's all equal, even if it's not the case for the quantities produced. The trick here, a bit tricky part here is the 2 pink and blue hydrogen, because these ones, the pink hydrogen might be considered as green energy from some, because it's coming from nuclear energy. Some might consider it as not green energy. But in France, for example, most of the electricity is produced by nuclear power plants, so pink hydrogen might be considered as green. And blue hydrogen is also produced from fossil energy, but then with CO2 captures and storage. So this is something which might be a bit tricky in the different name of the different things, because right now what you can see on these graphs is that in 2021, so very recently, 96% of the hydrogen was produced by fossil source, gas, coal, or petrol. And the forecast for 2030, so in the coming years, is that it will still be 73% of the production. So it means that it's due to this graph. You can see on the graphs that right now the cost of production of H2 for the green energy is something 5 to 6 euros per kilogram. And the ton of CO2, the cost of the ton of CO2 is close to 100 euros per ton. It's a bit less, 90 something. And if you want to have something interesting for the green hydrogen, the cost of the production of the green hydrogen has to decrease. So, because right now, producing by fossil energy is less than 2 euros per kilo. So it's 3 times higher, 3 to 4 times higher by green energy. So the forecast is that this graph will reverse the cost of the production, or will equal the cost of the production between the two in 2040 or 2050, depending on the different source of information. And this one will depend also on the political decision on the cost of the CO2. The actual real cost of the CO2 regarding environment is close to 600 to 700 euros per kg, and right now it's less than 100. So if you have a political decision to increase this CO2 price, it might be interesting. Why? Why there will be a need of large storage capacity of H2? You start with water, electrolyzers, and then a source of energy. Source of energy could be petrol, gas, coal, nuclear, or renewable energy, wind, solar, or others. Okay? This one, if you want to have green H2, you have to forget about the petrol, the gas, and the coal. Maybe even you have to forget about the uranium, because nuclear will not be so green. Then in this case, there will be a need of storage, because the production of renewable energy is not constant. For example, yesterday it was sunny here. Today it's a little bit less sunny. It's even more rainy. So the production of electricity using solar panel will not be the same. So in this case, yes, there will be a need of storage. But then there is a second factor also. It's a distribution, because the consumption of hydrogen right now is more for the industry, and the industry is not everywhere. And you cannot produce anywhere what you want to produce, the steel, the cement, or the different factories which are using a lot of energy. So what would be interesting for this, the need of large storage capacity will be for direct production of electricity. You're using the electrolyzer to produce the hydrogen, store huge quantity of hydrogen on the ground, and then use it using gas turbines on the same site as where you need the energy to be produced. So it's a conjunction of different factors which is not so easy to have. This graph shows you the expected demand. So right now, most of the H2 is used by industry, and it will take time to shift to other use of H2. For example, for the mobility, it's not for tomorrow. Even if now on the road you can have some cars using hydrogen, it's not so common. Even if for construction site you have huge construction equipment using hydrogen, it's not so common. So it will need a lot of time, several years before using this hydrogen for this. So you can see in dark blue, it's the industry consumption of H2, and you can see that it will take, here the expected graph shows that in 2050 it will start interesting. So my message here is not that it's not interesting to store underground H2. We will discuss in the panel 2 on the different, the different challenges and this. Right now, the most interesting part is to store in salt caverns, because it's the cost-efficient way to store the hydrogen underground. But it's not everywhere. So if you want to meet what I was saying here, the production and the consumption at the same place, maybe there will be a need of storage of H2 underground in mine-lined rock caverns. So this would be the only way. So all this will take time, and my message is here that it's time now to develop the technique, because we are still at the beginning of, from our side at least, on the beginning of the development of this technique, but we still have something like at least 10 years before seeing the first project starting construction. So 5 to 10 years. If things can accelerate a bit, it can be in 5 years, but it's not for tomorrow that there will be a construction contract for the underground storage. First, the technique is not yet ready, and then the demand is not so critical right now for this. This is our opinion. We can have different opinion. Everybody can have different views on this. So we are here to discuss this also, and this is what will be interesting. But based on all these different forecasts, it will be in the coming 10 years that we will see the first construction, 5 to 10 years for the first construction. I think that's it for me.
Thanks so much, Pascal. That was an incredible introduction to the topic. I'm amazed how quickly you whizzed through your amazing portfolio of slides, and also in how many countries already you're active with Geostock. And you also outlined the various possibilities of storage and what's the most common and cost-effective now, namely the salt caverns. But as you said, that's not possible in every geology or topography or location. So we have to look at other storage possibilities, and I think that also brings you to Hagerbach, if I might say. So maybe you can say something about what you think about the mine-lined cavern solution and how this can be, how can we progress with testing in this field and advance that as a form.
For sure. When I say that, you might be feeling that I'm not so optimistic. This is not the case. I strongly feel that there is a need to develop these underground storage capacities in mine rock cavern. But this one will take time. And I think in the topic 2, we'll be discussing also the technical challenges. And this is part of what we are developing. This is what we have discussed yesterday with Michael, for example, and Aurora. And which part can be started developing here, testing the materials. You will see what will be, I think I will present something in the panel 2, with the different steps that we are planning for the development of this. And part of these steps might start here with testing some part of the process before going to the final solution for this.
Okay, wow. So we have to tame our curiosity a bit longer still and wait for panel 2 to hear about that part. But we will talk some more after we've heard from each panelist about the various possibilities and solutions, and also how we can contribute the best way to a decarbonization of the industrial sector, as you alluded to. So,
as you might have seen, we have projects, for example, for the mine-lined rock caverns. We have feasibility studies in Ireland, for example. Ireland, they don't have salt. And they are really willing, the government of Ireland is very willing to turn green. So what they are now focusing on is to produce energy with windmill and with solar panels, and then to convert it in hydrogen. And then the principle will be to take, the production of energy will be anywhere in the country. Then there will be a storage facility where the rock is suitable for the underground lying rock caverns. And then they take the electricity from the grid, they convert it in hydrogen, and then during the night or when there will be a peak demand of electricity, they will burn it on the same site of the storage and re-inject on the grid. So it's just a kind of hub along the grid.
Right.
Production is somewhere with green renewable energy, and then they take this the energy, whatever is the production, they convert it in hydrogen, they store it, and whenever there is a demand, they burn it on the same site and re-inject. So this one can be done only in Ireland. They have only rock. They have good rocks. They have granites. They have very good rocks, and so they are trying to find the correct location along the grid within the suitable rock place, and then it would be this type of. So people are thinking different ways to use the hydrogen, and this is one way, for example.
And I would like to hand over now to our second panelist, where we will also hear a lot about a very unique way of producing energy, producing hydrogen from, I think, solar especially. Soraya, please, from Sohitec. He's, as I said, CEO of a startup. Sohitec now in the meantime already worldwide successful, and you will talk to us about your production solution and how you see the market evolving. Please, Soraya.
Yeah, thanks. If you don't mind,
yes,
maybe
you can stand
so
there.
that
That's fine if you use the microphone there.
Perfect. Thanks. I think the ground is already set from the earlier discussion with Mr. Pascal, Antonio, and Aurora. Saurabh Tamburne, as I was introduced, I represent Sohitec. We are a spin-off from Sohitec. We are on the production side of the game, basically, and particularly on the solar side. So we do direct solar hydrogen production solution. Our solution is based on our proprietary technology, but we do not simply, we are not a simple equipment manufacturer. We actually also develop projects. And that's where storage also comes into picture, even though we are basically mainly on the production side. But as you may already know from what Mr. Pascal said, storage is only not about storage. Actually, it's also about production and the demand and supply matching. So let's first see where technically hydrogen storage underground would pragmatically come into picture. It's not for each application that you will need such underground storage. It's only for, let's say, dedicated few. So here what you see is basically where potentially hydrogen will play a role. Some of this is old. So whatever you see on the left side in green is technically existing use cases of hydrogen. As Mr. Pascal also highlighted, most of the current hydrogen is basically for industry, whether it's refining, whether it's ammonia production, a lot of processing industry, metal processing, glass processing, semiconductor processing. So that's an existing one. There we already know that currently there are not so many underground hydrogen storage facilities. So we can already imagine these kind of use cases potentially do not require, or it also depends on how it is produced. Because currently, as again it was highlighted earlier, most of the hydrogen is produced from gray sources, which is basically mostly steam methane reforming. So with that approach, potentially this kind of storage is not required. But we will also venture into basically if we change the production approach, will we require storage facility, that too on large scale where underground storage may make sense even for these kind of use cases. But in the middle, there are new use cases or applications which are coming up for hydrogen. It's not traditional. Basically what we are trying to do here is replacing natural gas or coal or coke with hydrogen, which is basically for DRI, direct iron ore reduction in steel making, or even in cement for clinks. It's being basically proposed and slowly trying to be used, but these are up and coming sectors, not yet mature. Mobility was also being touched earlier. We also have the same, let's say, consensus that hydrogen mobility, particularly for light vehicles, probably would take too long. But for heavy vehicles, yes, probably it already makes sense. It's coming. Of course, it would take still a bit of time because it's a new, let's say, sector. But for heavy vehicles, that would be the first one to become mature in terms of mobility, whether it's logistic trucks, whether it's basically heavy machinery in mining areas, or even basically ships and those sort. And then on the right side, extreme right side, what you see in purple or blue is basically energy storage related applications. And that's where potentially large scale energy storage is required, where hydrogen storage underground would make basically a lot of sense. So let me go back now just to basically highlight. So these are showing the past year's production in terms of basically where hydrogen was used. So if you see from 2020 to 2022, most of the production is basically in traditional use cases. When I say traditional, mostly oil refining and in the industry, ammonia, methanol, on those aspects. Down the line, if you directly jump to the end of this decade, you already see that apart from traditional, there's a lot of basically new use cases coming up. So, and these use cases, as I just highlighted, would be either on transport, either on power, or even synthetic fuels. People are also planning to use hydrogen to methanol production or even synthetic aviation fuel, basically. So even those sectors are coming up. And down the line, if you see, slowly the green portion is touted to be increasing. Currently, as I said, 96% almost is basically gray. But if we are targeting 150 million tons per year production by 2030, 1/3 of that is basically expected to be green, and the rest potentially would be a mix of gray, and small portion would also be blue. But if you do it in a molecule such as hydrogen, yes, you can even expand that range. So that plot is actually not complete. The hydrogen storage underground can even expand vertically high up and even on the x-axis high up. So what I'm trying to say, if you're talking about multiple gigawatt hour, even all the way to terawatt hour, yes, you can do it in underground hydrogen storage. Even not just days-based storage, months, seasons, and even years, then yes, underground hydrogen storage basically comes into picture. So this, we think, would be one of the prominent, let's say, application sectors where we need to do this kind of storage. Now coming back a bit to what we do at So High Tech. So as we already discussed, right, a lot is also dependent on how you produce that hydrogen. So if the production rate can directly match with the consumption, which normally doesn't happen, you don't need storage, but this is not the case. So as we saw, most of the today's hydrogen is fossil fuel based. Currently what green approach is being used is basically with electrolysis, But even with electrolysis, of course, electricity has to be produced somewhere, then it has to be transmitted. The electricity production source is not always close basically to the utilization, so potentially grid is also involved, and then you do electrolysis. What we do is slightly different. So basically our approach is to use direct sunlight and produce hydrogen right at the place using the locally available sources. So we use sunlight and water and directly break that water with the sunlight in a photoelectrochemical process, much like what the trees do. So we call it artificial photosynthesis solution. And this is our core product, basically what we call an ARB or an artificial tree. And we as a company, as I said, we do not simply provide this one of these trees. We develop projects which could be a garden of arbs or even a forest of arbs, something like this. So we develop, build, and even operate these gardens and forests to provide eventually hydrogen as a service. And when I say hydrogen as a service, storage also comes into picture. And I will give you a concrete example. So in west part of India, one of the end customers basically was trying to produce ammonia. And it was 1,000 ton per day of ammonia production. For that, they needed hydrogen, and they wanted basically pure green, for sure. So they had enough land available, so they wanted to go with a solar approach. But ammonia production process, so this is what I'm trying to highlight. It also depends on where you are using the hydrogen. That's where even the storage would become interesting. So ammonia production process normally runs in a constant way throughout the 24-hour period. If you are doing production only during the solar time, then you need to overproduce and you need to store. For this 1,000 ton per day, you require 180 ton per day of hydrogen. That's a lot of hydrogen, just to tell you. Currently, you cannot store it in cylinders or even liquid. It's not economical. Basically, that's where you have to look into solutions like underground storage. Of course, you can operate the same system even during the night, try to match the production rate with the consumption, but this is not always possible. But this is a basically very concrete, real example of what I am trying to highlight. It's not only for power applications, even for applications like this, basically, even though ammonia production inherently can directly use hydrogen, so you don't need hydrogen storage, but because the end use case process is so specific that the production will not basically suffice to the production process of ammonia, you need basically large-scale storage. So that's that. This is just to give you a brief, let's say, visuals of how we deploy our project. So this is a forest of arbs. As I was highlighting, these are actually like trees. You can even install it on a agricultural land if you really need to be. So you can co-share the land. You can install it on a parking lot. You can definitely install it on a barren land or even depleted mining areas, basically. But yeah, so we develop this multiple of arbs project. We produce significant amount of hydrogen, and depending on the end use case, either we store it or directly convert it into whatever the end use may be. With this, slowly towards the end, I would just briefly like to summarize the key aspects of our solution. So, by the way, that working pilot is in Lausanne, already working since last 5 years now. So what we do is we collect the sunlight, concentrate that sunlight, focus it on the small reactor. That's, by the way, the magic sauce. It's a photoelectrochemical reactor. We pump the water to that device, and we break it directly using the sunlight. So that's what basically it's photo-driven breaking of water or photoelectrochemistry. But what's the benefit of this, right? You can do something similar with a solar panel and an electrolyzer, as I just described. In this process, even the transmission would come into picture, your power electronics would come into picture. So overall solar to hydrogen efficiency, you can take the best PV panel, best electrolyzer out there, would be around 10% or 12%. What we have is about 25%. So that is something very interesting. It's 2 times more than the conventional. So of course, in the same land, firstly, you can produce 2 times more. So that becomes highly, highly interesting. And this also has impact on the cost. So earlier, Mr. Pascal touched base on, currently the cost of producing green hydrogen is basically in the range of 5 to 6 euros per kilogram in most part of Europe. Of course, it has to go down if it has to compete with gray hydrogen, which is roughly $2 or 2 euros per kilogram. With our solution at scale, we can go there, and we can go there in an expedited way, not in 2030 or even 2035, which other people are trying to go for with the electrolysis. In our solution, we can try to achieve this basically even earlier. So that's that. then this is what I was describing, the water goes in, we directly break the water. There are multiple outputs also possible. Of course, when you produce hydrogen, oxygen is a byproduct. Heat is also basically being produced. We can also produce electricity directly if needed. So it's a versatile solution for basically fuel and power production. So this solution, that's where basically it's not only for industrial use cases, even for underground facilities, mining facilities. If you really need even power, we can really deploy a combination of hydrogen and electricity. You can store hydrogen for some time, convert it back when it's needed, but you can also provide electricity. And this is how basically a small garden looks like versus a forest would look something like this eventually. So what I'm trying to highlight, this is also a very modular solution. We can go all the way from few megawatt all the way basically even to hundreds of megawatt to a gigawatt scale facility. Almost towards the end, just briefly to highlight, this is what is quite important. The cost of producing hydrogen basically varies depending on which solution you use, and it's not a bullet number basically for each of the solutions. It's a range, as you see with the ellipsis. We lie somewhere over here. So yes, at scale, we can provide levelized cost of hydrogen close to 2 euros per kilogram, also in Europe. Of course, Switzerland would be slightly difficult just based on solar energy because of the sunlight. But yes, it's possible in most part of Europe. And as I said, eventually this solution could be 2 times better in terms of efficiency. So 2 times cheaper is possible. And also the land utilization. I give you the example of 2 times, but we can also produce all the way to 3 times. There are certain technical aspects basically also involved there in a given envelope plan. Almost towards the end, just to highlight, this is the solar map of world. Most of the hydrogen production projects, the big ones, are actually planned in the areas where there is high solar irradiation. So if we are also looking into storing hydrogen in those locations, we have to basically a bit follow this map. These are potential, our own targeted basically pipeline projects. But what I am highlighting is wherever the large-scale production would happen, eventually in those geographies, you have to also look for such conducive environment for doing underground storage. So yeah, with this, I conclude the session from presenting, and then open the question and answer
Thank you,
session.
Saurabh. Very good. Very interesting to hear about your technology and how you deploy it, and also where this is already happening and what you see as the most promising use cases. So I was just wondering, so you mentioned the government of India was interested in deploying it at large scale, and has this already happened? Is this in the process, or what is the status of that?
It's a big project of almost 400 megawatt. So these are infrastructure level projects. So the decisions, of course, definitely take time, as is happening in most of the hydrogen world, even in Europe. The timeline for this to be implemented is basically 2.5 to 3 years. So the FID potentially would come basically in 6 months or something like this. But yes, it's already a strong advanced project which is ongoing.
Excellent. And in which region of India is that happening?
So this is the west part of India, in the Gujarat region. I'm not sure if you are.
But will it be really sort of a large? Can I imagine it as a large, vast area of the Alps,
Yes.
combined with agriculture, or is it purely industrial, or?
No, so in that location, it was basically mostly isolated land which was available. That location was not, doesn't have to be co-shared with agriculture or anything. So it's vast land available where we are deploying basically, not even this size, we have 3 sizes of the ARP, so we are deploying the biggest one because that's the most economical one.
Right.
Just to highlight, so it's a project with 2,000 ARPs of the 25 meter size. So 25 meter is almost as big as this room, one single ARP basically of this size.
And you also mentioned one of a promising use case would be data centers.
Yes.
Is there some collaboration already happening that you've pitched it to ITC firms or the like?
So in fact, related to data center in Israel, we got approached by a developer who is developing a new big data center facility basically there. In data center, stable power is one of the utmost requirement.
Sure.
Most of them basically currently use diesel-based generator as the backup solution, and they are trying to shift basically to hydrogen. So with our solution, that's where I was highlighting electricity as well as hydrogen. So during the day, we can directly do solar to electricity, which would be used in the data center, and depending on what is the requirement for night time as well as the backup power, that excess energy basically would be the one which would be converted into hydrogen and stored. So yes, in fact, we are also working on, we just did the feasibility study, so it's in the initial phases, but there is a significant size project also we are discussing in data center.
Excellent, promising.
Yeah.
And maybe one quick final before we turn to our final panelist in this session. I didn't understand what you mean there's a problem with solar here in Switzerland.
Didn't mean to say from that.
You meant lack of sun, and it's just a joke, yes.
But just to highlight, Switzerland, we are already deploying very distributed projects in Switzerland, because there are a lot of industrial customers basically which are very distributed. Even though the sunlight is not on par with basically one of the best places, this is what I meant to say. It's still a conducive location to deploy such a solution. And just to highlight, our solution can also use external electricity during the night time to do electrolysis based chemistry. Technically power to X we can also do. So it's not only a solar driven process. During the day, of course, it's solar driven, but during the night or when, such as today, we can also take external electrons if they are available on the grid, which is quite interesting, by the way, because electrolyzers are fully dependent on the grid, but this solution is not. It can integrate with the grid in a dynamic way. If the grid wants to reject power, if the prices are cheaper, so that we can do basically with this solution.
Now turn to Stefan Oberholzer from the Federal Office of Environment in Switzerland.
Thank you.
He's an expert on carbon storage and battery technology. And please introduce yourself briefly and let us know what the Swiss Federal Office of Environment is embarking on. Where are the hotspots in Switzerland? What is happening? What is not happening? What should be happening? Stefan.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to be here and to be part of this discussion. Actually, I'm not from the Office of Environment, so I start with a quick overview. I'm from the Office of Energy.
Energy,
so,
sorry.
But politically, this is the same, same department.
Yeah.
Just as an introduction slide, you see here all the offices in this department. So I'm part of this grey Swiss Federal Office of Energy. I don't want to go to the list of our tasks in detail. I want to highlight that we also promote research and development and pilot and demonstration in the field of energy storage. And of course, in the whole field of underground or use of the underground, we are linked with the Office of Environment, because they are responsible for all the climate topics, for CCS, for carbon capture and storage, and there's a strong link also. I mean, if you look at the underground geothermal use of storage, so there's a strong link with this office. Myself, as you said, I'm responsible for a couple of programs, PV, high temperature solar batteries, but also hydrogen, but not hydrogen with the focus on underground, more about hydrogen storage, compressed air storage, electrolysis, fuel cells, and so on. And my background in the past, I studied physics, so, but I'm now since many years at the Swiss Federal Office of Energy. So I already mentioned we at the office, this is not the main task of the office, of course, but we coordinate research in the energy field. We spend roughly 50 million Swiss francs per year for R&D and pilot. We have several hundred projects ongoing that we directly follow, and we are organized in different programs. We have a pilot and demonstration program, but we have also thematic programs. One program where I'm responsible is called hydrogen, but there is another one, geoenergy, which is directly linked, and actually my colleague couldn't come here today, but of course we interact on the topic of hydrogen underground storage. So hydrogen is now a hot topic in Swiss energy policy, like everywhere. We are a little behind in the sense that we don't have published a hydrogen strategy yet. So we are working on this. Here on this slide you see some kind of timeline. So we we, apart from discussing about R&D, hydrogen in the context of R&D, we published a position paper with some general statements, and actually today we are working on this national hydrogen strategy, which is under discussion and which should be published end of the year. Last year we published a conceptual layout of hydrogen, which was asked from policy, from the parliament, to set a little bit the scene. I mean, there's not too much content in this, but it raises somehow the questions we have to answer. This is of course the demand in Switzerland. Do we have demand for hydrogen? Where do we have demand? Will this be produced only by domestic sources, or we need to be connected to a European hydrogen backbone? Will we participate with infrastructure, for example, to have a hydrogen transit pipeline through Switzerland? How much we will import? And finally, also, of course, how much do we need to store in Switzerland? Can we only import, or do we need to store? And these are kind of questions we don't have a quick answer yet. We have, in the past, I initiated once a study to look at the Swiss hydrogen demand today. I mean, this is somehow similar with what was shown before from IEA and so on. So the major demand today is industry, refineries. So you see the whole grey part is only refinery in Switzerland and very little other sources. What is growing is hydrogen use for mobility. Perhaps you are aware there are some trucks. Nevertheless, this is not going on so fast as expected before. So at the time being, we have 50 trucks, around 50 trucks. It's a complete private initiative, but very successful. A lot of experience, again, as you see here. But this is also to see how this develops. Green hydrogen production in Switzerland is also reality already today. I mean, a couple of megawatts. As you see here on the map, I mean, you don't see the rivers, but most of these installations, they are using runoff river hydro plants. The idea is because there you have a lot of electricity. If you do this with solar, of course, the hydrogen gets more expensive. I was responsible in coordinating a gas storage report, which we had to develop in 2022, when there was the issue about gas problems in all over Europe. The question we were asked is are there capacities in Switzerland to store gas? I mean, hydrogen was not in the main focus, and we discussed this position or this paper also with the stakeholders like Gasnat or others. I mean, we have 3 major companies responsible for gas in Switzerland. And I mean, what is already known today is that there's no physical gas storage capacities in Switzerland. We have only for daily storage, we have gas storage, which are somehow limited. There are some companies like Gasnat, they have collaboration with France, for example in Etres, where they have access for 1 terawatt-hour or something like this. And there are projects which are already existing since years, for example, line rock caverns in the Alps, which have been now somehow refreshed, and we are looking at this, or they are looking at this again, if it would make sense now also in the context of hydrogen storage. I want to highlight one R&D project where we were actually directly involved. This was a project initiated by Austria and with some Swiss partners. So the idea is to store methane underground, or to inject hydrogen and CO2 into the underground and let the biology produce the gas underground and refill the empty gas storage fields. And the Swiss part in this project, because the technology is Austrian, was a little bit to look at the situation in Switzerland. Are there options to store gas or hydrogen? So there are a lot of competences here around. There are also major programs running. I don't want to go into the details that definitely look at the underground, and we also pushed somehow by politics. You see here, I mentioned just 2 parliamentary initiatives which really have been accepted, or at least one, that we are forced, not our office, but in general, to study the underground much more in the context of can we use it for CO2 storage, can we use it for hydrogen storage, also aspects to produce, to use the heat, and eventually also geothermal for electricity production. I wanted to be short, and I'm very happy that my colleagues already have presented much more information about hydrogen in general.
Thank you so much, Stefan Oberholzer, Federal Office of Energy. And thanks for giving us this overview of what your office is involved in Switzerland, but also what initiatives are happening, what research and development. The various green hydrogen generation spots that you showed throughout the map of Switzerland, you said they were electricity plants based on river generation. So are these private initiatives, or are these federally endorsed ones?
No, these are private. I mean, private.
Who is behind those? Yeah.
Yeah, one, for example, the major one is Hydrospider, which is a joint venture between H2 Energy and Alpic, which is one of the major energy companies in Switzerland. But there are also other utilities that have now this in the focus, which are producing hydrogen today.
Interesting. So I just read about Germany being sort of really on the forefront of hydrogen, pushing it very much on a policy level, but also trying to decarbonize by using hydrogen. We've heard of hydrogen-fueled trains by Deutsche Bahn. I'm just using that as an example. We've heard of other examples happening in Ireland. I know the UK is very active in hydrogen. We'll hear about examples from Scandinavia later on. What is the goal, or can you say something about the goals on a Swiss level? How much hydrogen should be produced, or are you still in this phase of, as you said, demand, supply, import, storage, all these questions that you still need to define, basically?
No, we don't have a clear picture about the hydrogen demand in the future. We have studies also initiated from our side, but there are also other studies around at ETH and others which look in detail. We just had a study recently to look closer in the demand for high temperature processes, to really look at processes where you need hydrogen. We don't have this heavy steel industry, for example, in Switzerland, like in Germany. So for this, we probably will need less hydrogen, but exactly we don't know yet. Trains, you mentioned, trains are electrified in Switzerland. Nevertheless, there are perhaps niche applications where hydrogen could play a role, but this will not be the terawatt-hour quantities.
You mentioned trucks and transport before. We heard that's not the main application maybe, but the 50 trucks, is that like part of a government project, or
no,
what
not
are they
at all.
being used for?
No, we were, at the very beginning, we were helping a little bit with pilot, but this was a major input from our side, but this is a private initiative with the association which is pushing this. But battery electric trucks are booming today in Switzerland as everywhere, and it's relatively difficult cost-wise to compete this today with hydrogen at this high energy prices still for the hydrogen. So today it's, I don't have the exact figures, but it's roughly 24 or 25 Swiss francs a kilogram. Hydrogen has increased very much in the last years.
I think the pricing situation and the pricing discussion is where it will all fall or fail, right?
Not only the price, you know, for private transportation. In France, for example, in Paris, you have some hydrogen vehicles, okay? When you discuss with the owners, so the time for refueling is the same as with petrol. Okay, you spend 10 minutes to refuel. The capacity is the same as with petrol. You have 500, 600 kilometers capacity of one. The cost is the same, even if it's subsidized by the government. The cost of refueling the car is the same, and the cost of the car is twice. So it means that there is absolutely no interest right now, economically speaking, to have these cars. And moreover, the problem with the hydrogen for private transportation is that you need some refueling stations all over the country. Okay, in Germany they are a bit more advanced than in France,
Yeah.
okay, but it means that a lot of investments on this for a very small capacity.
Yeah.
And for a very small use. So it's also difficult to find the right balance
Right.
with this investment for a very small use. Okay, for trucks it might be, but you will need also some refueling stations all around the major routes of transportation. And there is also a difficulty in the trucks. You need to store the hydrogen in small tanks, 700 bars. 700 bars is still a bit challenging to design and then to manufacture the tanks for this. And it might be also dangerous in case of accident. So it will take time, I guess, for the public, for the transportation. And for the planes, it's not for tomorrow. There are plenty of companies working on the hydrogen planes, but it's not for tomorrow, this one.
Yeah. So, but it's reassuring that so much is being studied and tested, and that's hopefully it can be accelerated by maybe also your type of company, Soraya. So maybe you want to say something about how you see like the next 10 years happening in terms of deploying more of this kind of technology, because so many governments now are struggling with and having goals to accelerate decarbonization. And what is the best mix? What is the best way to break it down? And how much support does a startup like you get, for instance, from the Swiss government? Are there incentives for companies like you to really go forward and test and research this further? And
So thanks for this. Let me take the first question first. As you highlighted, yes, price is one of the key factor, by the way, in terms of adoption. Mostly because if you're talking about electricity-based hydrogen production, electricity prices are not that low. I mean, if you multiply by 60, which is what you need, 60 units to produce 1 kilogram, the prices in Switzerland can be 20 Swiss franc, which is quite high. You need, I think, for parity in Switzerland, maybe 8 euros or 8 Swiss franc, even for the mobility applications. But yes, from the perspective of how we look at it and how we are deploying, for sure, industrial use cases are the first ones we are focusing on. Starting with distributed ones, because for distributed ones, you don't have to directly compete with $2, because $2 is at the refinery level. Basically, distributed industrial customers still pay multiple times higher because it's getting transported to them. From there, basically, we are expanding to slightly larger scale production, but again in industry, mostly ammonia production or other large scale industrial use case. Mobility is also on our radar, but it's not directly coming from us. We work with certain, let's say, truck manufacturers who are trying to sell their trucks. If they want to sell, you need the hydrogen fueling station, you need the production. So we are currently working with one German company who is trying to provide hydrogen mobility as a service, and we provide the production solution. One example was for FedEx in US. Across 18 commercial centers of FedEx in California, basically we are locally producing, locally creating the fueling station. There, yes, economics was not a big question. It's actually about creating the infrastructure. With mobility, that's the challenge actually. You have to create that infrastructure. So these are the sectors which we are targeting. Now in terms of basically how we have been supported, in fact we have been supported right from the beginning with Swiss Federal Office of Energy with their R&D scheme. That's how we did our first let's get scale up demonstration in Lausanne. Going down the line, of course, as you go bigger and bigger,
the federal incentive reduces. In Switzerland, the policy is under forming. But outside Switzerland, if I look at it, Europe, US, as well as India, there's a big incentive basically on the production side if you can produce green.
Yeah.
US is providing a simple $3 per kilogram subsidy. In Europe, technically, it's even higher, but it's a complex thing to understand. The subsidy or the incentive can still be higher. So initially, yes, there's a lot of push from the policymakers to kick off. But if it has to sustain, if the green hydrogen has to compete with grey hydrogen, you need to not rely on the subsidies or the incentives. Yes, to kick off, you can use this, but eventually it has to be at cost parity. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Yeah.
That's also your experience, Pascal?
Yeah. But again, what I hear here is that there is a need of having the production of hydrogen where you need it, and for the mobility, you don't need huge capacities. So the underground storage will more fit for industrial use or for electricity production at certain locations. But so we are not talking about the same. I'm not saying that hydrogen is not interesting for the transportation, but it would be on a different scheme and different scale. So the scale of small production and small storage capacity at different locations, but not the huge underground storage capacities that we are looking at for the mine caverns, for example.
So are many of your projects then also coupled to steel manufacturing or industrial?
Or for electricity production.
Or electricity production. That is about half the amount or the demand? Or?
More or less, yes. Some countries are looking at huge production, but then there will be, so we have done some pre-feasibility studies, then there will be the problem of transportation. So transportation, it's something maybe which will be highlighted in further discussions. For example, if you transform it to ammonia is something that you can transport because it does exist already. For the hydrogen transportation, it's something more difficult. If you want to be liquefied, the cost is very too high right now. So there is no way. Then you can construct some pipeline. There are some projects, for example, from North Africa to North Europe, for example, crossing Spain, France, and going up. This one will be huge project of pipelines. But the pipeline for transportation of hydrogen is 1 to 2 million per kilometer. So you have to balance together the production with renewable energy for solar panel, for example, in Northern Africa, and so it has to be balanced.
Yeah, of course, there's a lot of factors to be put in the equation, and as you say, what is the demand, what is the storage capability. I would like to open up to the audience if anyone has a question to one of the panelists, maybe. Yes, Matthias, you can use a mic.
No, I think it's okay.
That would be great for the
Just a thought or a comment, actually, Stefan, for you. So you said most of the hydrogen production facilities are associated with hydropower in Switzerland. But then hydropower is actually beautiful because it's always running, right? You would actually want to store your hydrogen produced out of wind or out of solar, rather than, because you can actually feed the base power with your hydro power plants.
Yeah,
that's just a comment. And then another question with your the hydrogen, your mirrors. What's the capacity of those? In terms of sorry, that's for
Yeah. No, but if Stephen wants to add on the first one, that's what I was just saying.
Yeah, it's just a simple reasoning is that you don't pay the grid fees if you produce directly there where the electricity is produced, and of course, I mean, capex for electrolysis are still high. So if you have 5,000-6,000 hours or 1,000 hours a year you use the electrolysis, this makes still a big difference on the levelized cost of hydrogen at the end. So this is, of course, if we are discussing and we voted about just last weekend about grid tariffs, for example, exemptions for storage. If you in the future, if you would use hydrogen for storage and reproduce electricity and feeding back into the grid, then you wouldn't need to pay the grid as you don't have to pay it for pumped hydro. So this is some developments ongoing, but the reasoning is that you wanted to have the hydrogen as cheap as possible to put the installations there.
Okay, that was question 1, and question 2 to Soraya.
Yeah, so just to add, so we have different sizes. The biggest one has a capacity of basically 80 kilogram of hydrogen per day. Then you can multiply it by a year if you are more comfortable with that. And the mid size basically is roughly 40 kilogram per day. And then, as I said, depending on what is the end use case, whether you need 1 ton per day or whatever, we combine the multiple of them together. Normally, none of our projects are with one. This is just to already highlight. They are with multiple, minimum 5 or even 25 or something like this. These are more distributed projects in Switzerland, but outside Switzerland, most of them are basically with hundreds of these apps.
So I think that answered your question. I think it's time for the coffee break, if I'm not mistaken. So I think we will continue discussing with the panelists, and before we lead over to panel 2, I want to thank our 3 panelists for this really interesting kickoff of today's discussion on hydrogen storage. And let's continue in the break. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will have 10 minutes coffee break now, and then we come back for the
10 minutes coffee break? Okay. 15 minutes coffee